Good evening. Welcome to Perez Art Museum, Miami. I'm Adrienne Chadwick, the Deputy Director for Education here at PAM. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to Maria Del Valle, Natalia Zuluaga, Charisse Crockett, and the whole Arts Center South Florida team for organizing Recess, Art, Pedagogy, and the Social Sphere. So we started yesterday with a great roundtable here at PAM, and I look forward to hearing from our panelists today. In the spring of 1984, Art Center South Florida was founded by Ellie Schneiderman on Lincoln Road in Miami Beach as an organization to address the community's cultural needs. Today, Art Center is credited as being the catalyst for the revitalization of Lincoln Road and its surrounding areas, having provided studio residencies and exhibition opportunities to more than 1,000 visual artists, while also offering art classes and outreach programs to the community. Art Center South Florida prides itself in being one of the few institutions in South Florida that grants free admission to all of its exhibitions and other public programming in an effort to make arts accessible to all. Exhibitions and programs at Art Center are made possible with the support of the Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs and the Cultural Affairs Council, the Miami-Dade County Mayor and Board of County Commissioners, the Miami Beach Mayor and City Commissioners, Florida Department of State and the State of Florida Division of Cultural Affairs, the Florida Arts Council, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. I'd like to introduce you to Maria Del Valle, who has been the Executive Director at Art Center South Florida since 2012. Prior to joining Art Center, she was the Executive Director of CREAA, an international cultural center in Madrid, Spain, focused on creation, production, arts education, and research programs. From 2004 to 2010, Del Valle was Executive Director of the Cultural Center of Spain in Miami, where she achieved her purpose of bringing the center to the front line of the cultural scene in Miami. Del Valle has many years of experience in management and production of cultural and entertainment projects. She was the production director of the Abadia Theater in Madrid, Planet Events Prisa Group. Del Valle frequently collaborates with Spanish and Latin American institutions in academic programs in arts management and culture and development. She holds a law degree and a master's in arts administration from Complutense University, Madrid. In 2014, Del Valle attended Strategic Perspectives in Nonprofit Management at Harvard Business School, Executive Education. So please join me in welcoming Maria Del Valle.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. So I want to thank PAM now. I think that, we are honored and are really happy to be here today. And I want to thank all PAM staff from, all departments, but especially Adrienne and all her team. And they have been so kind and so professional that I can say that PAM is real open for. We haven't seen that is the motto, and we truly have a resource for the community. And it's really something wonderful, this space that is open for all of us. Now I want to thank all the panelists that also were yesterday, where we had a really lively conversation. And where we did a collective exercise talking about the role of education, the role that education has in shaping our institutions. And not only the institutions, but us as humans. I want to thank you, the participants in the roundtable yesterday, Gordon Knox, president of the San Francisco Art Institute, Jean Moreno, curator of programs at ICA, Rene Morales, curator here at PAM, and Jared Ernst, faculty at BHFQU, and instructor of the new program, MFU Miami. And then all my staff and team that, you are wonderful guys. And finally, I want to like all the people that have been supporting us during over a year. We started a process, an open and very candid conversation with cultural leaders, curators, artists, trying to get and gather information to help us to refine and reimagine the future of the Art Center South Florida. We do think that being in a constant mode of evaluation and reassessing what we are doing is the only way to move forward. We are committed to use our knowledge, our lessons learned, to overcome obstacles and share it with all for the advancement and providing positive change for our world, for our field, and for the world. And yes, we are that ambitious. We think that with effort, we are going to, and all together, we are going to be able to accomplish and make some changes. It seems now that the world is in a turning point, and probably education, in capital education, and art will be one of the very few things that can save us as humans. Education gives us the ability to recognize the other, to respect the other. And artists, they have the power and the ability, as Gordon put yesterday, to send and explain and send that message in a very powerful manner. But opportunities will arise. And maybe now is a good moment to focus on what is really relevant and what are the most urgent issues to be addressed. What is clear for us is that we will have to work harder in finding ways of collaboration, and for all of us working in the same territory, complement each other and share knowledge and resources. And now I leave you with this excellent table, and I give the word to Rachel Rakes, independent curator, critic, teacher based in New York, and now one of our fellows in the program, MFU Miami. Thank you so much.
Hi, so I'm just going to say a few words before we begin with the panelists. In exploring the many forms that unaccredited arts education can take and the audiences that it can engage, this panel to me also kind of doubles as a re-examination of the role and potential of institutions today. Whether they be established or nascent, brick and mortar or mobile, social networks or online platforms. While the era of new institutionalism in contemporary art is said to have waned, and in doing so expose some of the limits of interactivity and relationality in spaces of art exhibition, the idea that the art institution can act as a site of fluid, reactive, and compensatory production very much remains. Today we're going to hear from 5 critical projects that experiment with educational forms, seeking in various ways to alter the art world, politics, and the social sphere. First, we will hear from Natalia Zuluaga, the artistic director of Art Center South Florida, who will discuss the many recent and forthcoming initiatives the center has taken in order to foment art and political discourse in Miami, in particular through its applied artistic research program. Following Natalia will be Seth Cameron, the president and a co-founder of the Bruce High Quality Foundation University, which since 2009 has offered dozens of free classes that expansively cover the arts, as well as hosted several gatherings, game shows, exhibitions, and performances, and is currently working with Art Center to execute the inaugural fellowship program, MFU Miami. Next up will be Fona Foreman and Teddy Cruz, whose UCSD cross-border initiative promotes the exchange of information and resources in underserved neighborhoods on both sides of the Tijuana-San Diego border. And in doing so, reactivates the university to be a more equitable part of the communities in which it is situated. Then, Javier Duero will discuss La Clinique de Esbaluar, an informal training program for artists which takes place within the purview of Esbaluar Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Mallorca, Spain. The program there promotes the professionalization of artists by enabling analysis tools, knowledge, resources, and the mentoring of creative practice. And finally, we are excited to have Mohammed Salemi, a co-organizer of the new Center for Research and Practice, which is a membership-based, democratically structured organization that offers advanced seminars, group research facilitation, and serves as an online social nexus for thinking about the future of art and society. Mohammed will be joining us by Skype from Beirut. Following the presentations, we'll have a discussion and then open the floor to comments and questions. And I want to emphasize, I guess, to the audience and to all the panelists as well, that the vectoring summoned in the title of this program should be thought of as a multi-participatory endeavor. While each of the projects these panelists represent is exceptionally well thought, critical, and necessary. Each has been organized and is presented here with a sense of ongoing malleability. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Natalia.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Pam, everybody, et cetera, for being here and for these amazing panelists that I get to share this stage with. I should give a very brief warning that we're going to be playing musical chairs and switching cables and calling people on Skype, so you'll see a tiny bit of chaos as we sort of move down the line. Chaos. There we go. So I think to start off, it's really helpful to understand that generally speaking, at Art Center, we focus primarily on two kinds of programs. We have incubating programs and we have outward-facing programs. Incubating programs nurture and foster artistic and curatorial development. They include the Program for Applied Artistic Research, which Rachel mentioned and I'll talk about in some detail. They include our new fellowship program, where 5 cultural practitioners come and work with an education initiative for an intense 12 to 16-week residency here in Miami. It's a program that, as you also mentioned, we're running this season with the Bruce High Quality Foundation. This is very easy because I get to point at people I know. Incubating programs also include studio and international residency opportunities. And these programs basically offer resources. They offer seminars, they offer space for artists, for curators, and other practitioners to develop their practices and projects. Our outward-facing programs are exactly what they sound like. They are the exhibitions, the public programs, the lectures, and the film screenings. So these are all of the basically public moments of these incubating efforts. These outward-facing programs don't just happen at Art Center, as you can tell, right? So they happen in collaboration with a lot of institutional partners like Pam, and within inside and outside of South Florida. This detail is really important because we don't just see the work of the institution bound by its walls, but really in the relationship and in the exchanges with other stakeholders as well. And this goes from the individual level to the institutional level to the city level. And I mean, I think in some ways our ambitions are trying to reach even like a planetary level, right? Our outward-facing programs and our incubating programs are not mutually exclusive, and in fact, they cross over in many ways. It's just an easy way to think about how these two mechanisms work. So for example, when exhibitions organized by or featuring the work of resident artists, or when visiting faculty from the Program for Applied Artistic Research give public lectures, or when participants in those seminars go on to develop other outputs within or outside of Art Center. And the idea is that this dynamic interplay between our incubating programs and our outward-facing programs become even more complex and more interesting as time goes on. In the coming year, for example, we'll be working on Art in Public Life, which is a program that will place an artist or a collaborative to work alongside government counterparts at the City of Miami Beach in order to work on projects on the ground and that address things like sea level rise, public transportation, housing, infrastructure. So this idea of a dynamic interplay between what we do when we incubate and how we act in or upon the world is at the core of the Program for Applied Artistic Research. So what is the program? It is a free form and it's a school that engages important dialogues around contemporary realities in the cultural sphere and beyond it. It promotes the interaction between practitioners of different fields in an effort to develop projects that shed light on the dynamics that are organizing present-day urban and global realities. It is a non-degree granting program that offers a number of seminars and workshops by distinguished faculty like Fana and Teddy, who have joined us here tonight. And in the near future, will also be taught and organized by our Art Center Fellows. Over the past 6 months, for example, the seminars explored the shifting conception of the border. From geographic boundaries to gender polyphony, we tried to flesh out how these shifts, these political currents, and the movements of people have altered the interfaces between the way we think about inside and outside. Some of the projects that were started during those sessions actually have a future life too, such as Victoria Ivanova's Citizenship for a Post-Human Rights World, which continues in the fall and in the spring in a different form. As a result, these are projects that are iterative, both in their aims and their duration. So why applied artistic research? Simply put, it's knowledge applied. But the importance of this applicability is not necessarily usability in the sense of utility. Instead, I see the program and its outputs as not only a response to the political and social dynamics organizing our contemporary moment, but specifically actually to the state of art education as well. And again, that's not necessarily outside of those two realms of the social and the political, right? So in this way, I'm thinking of applied in a way that counters what my ex-professor Suhail Malik diagnoses as a zombie criticality. It sounds pretty scary. The zombie criticality is a kind of systemic belief in the incapacity or the inconsequentiality of critique and thereby of art. Basically, Suhail says that the primary role the Art Academy fills today and what it banks on is professionalizing art and artists by making us all quite adept and articulate about critiquing our surroundings. And this isn't a bad thing, right? Because it's really important to be able to identify those things. It's important. But the question remains as to what we could do with such an ability to recognize that which is wrong, unjust, and inequitable about our contemporary moment. It's not the progressive proclamation that things should just be better, because while we champion that ability to critically see and think, we constantly distance ourselves from power and from the idea that art knowledge could be instrumentalized to act upon those very problems. And as a result, that zombie criticality leaves us unknowingly supporting the very systems we critique, in part because the institutions we then go on to create and the education that they go on to foster depend on that belief of incapacity in order to continue to exist. So, by developing programs that foster and support applied engagement toward those systems and conditions, and not just soft encouragement. This is actually providing actual resources to back up those aims. We're committing to a much longer loop than your typical exhibition season or your fiscal year. In this way, we're dedicated to something in the spirit of what Benjamin Bratton would call a pedagogy of long circuits. And I'm really bastardizing his word there quite a bit. But it's a pedagogy and education, a kind of practice that is scaled to the scope of the real, both in terms of its duration and its aims. And it's not just about making the social, political, or economic problems or realities of our times digestible and knowable, but actually something that we can act upon, right? So, to conclude. While the program for applied artistic research is there to fill a void in Miami of access to knowledge and to provide a very necessary space for critical engagement and discourse, the idea is that we continue to provide avenues to support this appliedness of it, of that appliedness of that criticality in order to avoid becoming zombies. That's it. Thank you.
Zombies. So, assume man is fundamentally good and you abandon satire in favor of education. This was a quote, it continues to be a quote, that we asked potential residents to the program that now exists here, among which Rachel is a part of, as well as several people here. Oh, now you're picking me up. To respond to in order to apply to the program. I don't think I actually told them where it's from. It's from a book about mannerism and economics written by a guy named Remy G. Saslin. You don't need to know that. It's not an important book. It's really hard to find and out of print. But the quote is really fascinating to me, and one that I came upon around 2008, right before we actually founded the Bruce High Quality Foundation University. So I'll do a little quick background on what that is and how, and the whole deal. So this is Bruce High Quality. Bruce High Quality was a puppet that a bunch of people got inside of in order to commit satire upon the world. The Bruce High Quality Foundation was established in 2001. I say established, not really. It was a group of people, group of artists, art students, me included, that wanted to do some stuff together. There were things that were happening in the world that continue to happen that we thought were ridiculous, and so we said, we will do ridiculous things in response to that, satire. Bruce High Quality himself was actually entered into a contest to become an art star via reality television. He failed in that endeavor and continues to decay. Other projects that we did in that vein, this is an attempt at public art where we recreated one of Christo's gates and attempted to mount it onto a recreation of Central Park that was floating around the island of Manhattan. This is a still from a musical theater production called Cats on Broadway. That's Broadway in Brooklyn. That retold that story. We actually didn't use the real story of Cats at all. It was a story of the gentrification of the neighborhood, where cats are artists. We used actual artists, not actual cats. So 2008, I came upon this quote after engaging in satire for a number of years, and I said, oh no, what if I was wrong? Maybe we should abandon satire in favor of education. And so a few months later, we started a school because, why not do the thing you think you might ought to do? We weren't quite sure that we should abandon satire completely. They didn't all dress like this in the first year. That was a Halloween party, but still it's the best image I have of a bunch of people who were there. We opened the school in a former Sufi bookstore in Tribeca. Someone we knew had the space and said, if you don't make me renovate it, you can use it for a while. So we did, and we had no idea what it would mean to open a school, so we looked around for some models. The one that we liked the best was actually created by this guy, A.S. Neal, a rowdy Scotsman who created a boarding school called Summerhill, which still exists, I believe. And it's the first real free school model. Basically what free school meant, according to A.S. Neal, was that students and teachers had a kind of equal say in things. It was an entirely democratic model. So if you were a 5-year-old, or you were the groundskeeper, or you were a math teacher, you would get together for a big meeting. These were held very regularly. Anyone could call the meeting, and everybody voted. So-and-so stole my Cheerios. Everyone gets a vote on what to do about it. If you wanted to learn to read, someone would help you learn to read. If you didn't want to learn to read, you didn't learn to read. Results were mixed. Most people did, in fact, learn to read, which was an interesting result of that experiment that continues to today. There are a few of these things that exist in the world. There's actually one in Brooklyn where my kid goes to school. It's called the Brooklyn Free School, which is unfortunately very expensive. So we ran that for a while. Now, the free school model is really great in a boarding school environment, but trying to do it with people that are in their 20s in New York City who have to, pay their rent and do jobs and all sorts of stuff brings in all kinds of problems. Like, the fact is, people just want to show up and participate in a class, or they don't. They don't necessarily want to participate in a new democratic idea. So we went on the hunt for other ways of organizing what we would do. And in order to do that, we needed to travel the country and visit a bunch of schools and alternative spaces and museums and find out what's going on in arts education today. What are some ideas we could steal? So we got in this school bus and went around the country for a month, visited 12 cities, and basically held roundtable kind of conversations with anyone and everyone we could find. They usually looked kind of like this, except this one has our logo on it, because we came back and decided we would open the school again, but we would lean into institutionality a little bit more. So we became a nonprofit, rented a new space, put up a big sign so people would know where to find it, and we started paying people. So now, instead of anyone teaching a class, we would actually hire people to teach classes. They were paid slightly better than the average adjunct. This continues today. They're paid slightly better than the average adjunct teaching at SVA or Pratt or any of the other art schools in the city. And we saw this improves quality. It also improves attendance. Those are good things, right? So yeah, but then we also had to do the work of raising money and all that sort of stuff. So those are nefarious questions as well. The next iteration of what we've tried to do with this experiment is called the MFU, which started last year. And this is a year-long residency program. So we moved the space again. Now we moved to Brooklyn. And part of the reason why we started this is we were concerned with the idea that, as great as it is to hold free public classes, we're still getting a constituency of people that just show up to take a class and then they leave. And it's very seminar-based, and we lose out on the kind of conversations that might happen by accident in a studio space, where just making things near people actually helps your practice in some way. We realized we couldn't provide free studios for anyone and everyone. It's just not feasible. But we could do it for 5 people. So we created an application process, and we said, how are we going to make this like jive with the idea that we still want to provide things that are open to anyone? And so the way that our program works is we selected 5 residents who also had to answer the question of that weird quote, to come get a space for a year, make whatever they're going to make, and they take a class together half the time. In the second half, they teach classes that are open to the public. So they spend about 10 weeks developing their course, and then they actually do it. So there's a couple of them having one of those casual studio encounters that we can't organize, and then there they are actually teaching a real live class to a bunch of people that we don't know who just showed up because we promoted it. Right now we're doing a similar version of that, which you mentioned before, which is the MFU in Miami, with these fine people, which we hope will also lead to all kinds of new stuff. So that's the sort of quote part thing. Did I have a little more time? Because I have this little spiel I wrote too. All right, we're going to go for the spiel. Because I got really excited about yesterday's panel, and I had some response. So this morning I wrote something. And you know, we experiment, we change what we're doing like every semester. It's really hard for us to stick with a program because we like to think that we still don't know what arts education should be. And we very much question the fact that we are some kind of an institution now. So this morning I woke up and I wrote down, how many credit hours in an MFA program were required to produce the Demoiselle d'Avignon? What visual studies PhD program did Artemisia Gentileschi attend? What high school magnet visual arts program did Peter Bruegel attend? If tomorrow the National Endowment for the Arts ceased to exist, would art be better, worse, or no demonstrable change in quality? If tomorrow every MFA program in the country closed its doors, would art be better, worse, or no demonstrable change in quality? If tomorrow an insect infestation destroyed the worldwide flax crop, would art be better, worse, or no demonstrable change in quality? Which has been demonstrably better for the overall quality and abundance of works of art, an economy based on fairness or an economy based on self-interest? Which has been demonstrably better for the overall quality and abundance of works of art, republican democracy or theological dictatorship? So that's a quiz. You can score yourselves. Yesterday, Gordon, hi Gordon, made what I think is a fair point by demonstrating that any institution must justify its existence based on a net positive benefit to humanity. And I agree with this assertion. Is that more or less, that makes sense, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. However, I don't think we necessarily have evidence that institutional support for the arts has been a good thing. Here's a quote that I found relevant to this. This is Orson Welles doing a crib on Graham Greene. You know what the fellow said. In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, and bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace. And what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. So history contains too many examples to ignore that show that the arts can and do flourish under repressive governmental and economic systems. And likewise, egalitarian and humanistic institutional imperatives have shown no remarkable capacity to improve the overall quality of art. Therefore, I propose the elimination of all federal and private funding of the arts. I propose the immediate closing down of all institutional learning environments for the arts. All wall labels, pamphlets, and audio guides will be immediately removed from museums of art. And I propose that the purchase and sale of any work of art be made illegal, punishable by public humiliation and mockery. Use of art for the purposes of currency, decoration, spectacle, education, real estate development, desktop wallpapering, keychains, advertising, and virtue signaling will also be banned. Groups of people gathering intentionally to discuss art will be regarded with suspicion. Anyone discovered to be taking notes at such meetings will be immediately isolated from the group and forced to listen to Beethoven's Opus 133, the Great Fugue String Quartet, until they've learned their lesson. The end.
So now we switch.
We work from the base of the formal institution. Teddy and I direct a university-based research practice in a zone of intense conflict. Teddy, as an urbanist and architect, and me as a political theorist, are trying to hold the institution accountable to engage ethically in the region of conflict where we live. Our campus is just 20 minutes from the US-Mexico border that divides San Diego and Tijuana. So it's a border between two cities, between two countries, and indeed between two continents. And its geopolitical significance has obviously become dramatic in recent years, a return again to criminalizing the border as a site of exclusion. For us, the border is really a microcosm of all of the conflicts and deprivations that globalization has inflicted on the world's most vulnerable people. And as professors in a public research university in this region, we want to hold the institution accountable. We, in our practice, engaged marginalized communities on both sides of the border, both in the southernmost parts of San Diego as well as in Tijuana. And we really see our practice as one of mediation and a kind of curatorial translation of bottom-up creativity, bottom-up democratic participatory energy. These are dynamics that happen in these communities that are entirely off the radar of planners and of institutions who are positioned to actually produce positive change in our region. And so we see ourselves as navigating a kind of gap between bottom-up capacity and creativity and top-down resources. And what this means for working from the base of the university is we are rethinking what is typically seen as a vertical relation between institutions of power and communities that are in conditions of scarcity. Basically, when the university and museums and municipalities are actually in the same boat, when they think about engaging marginalized contexts, it's usually in a vertical relation, that the university, that the institution has all of the knowledge, all of the resources, and the communities are like empty vessels just waiting to be filled with what we can provide to them. So it's a model of provision. Universities are also engaged what's called applied research. And I know the word applied has come up before, but in the university it's really problematic because the community is often seen as a kind of laboratory to test out what we've already figured out on the campus. We have the knowledge, we come and test it out there, and then we disappear. So it's always a vertical model. We are trying to tip the relation to a horizontal one. We see this as an ethical move, and basically the assumption is that the university and our production of knowledge, we need these communities. We need to understand what happens in these communities as much as these communities need us. So we're thinking about the relationship in reciprocal terms, as a lateral relationship rather than a vertical one. And we have a variety of research and educational projects in the region that Teddy will.
So the project that has emerged from these reflections is what we've called the UCSD Cross-Border Community Stations, seeking, in fact, a new form of partnership between community and university, arguing that both communities and universities can be meaningful partners in tackling and confronting inequality. Because, in fact, we've argued to our chancellor, both communities and universities have resources and knowledges to contribute. So in a sense, this project is a knowledge exchange platform, linking the specialized knowledge of the university with the creative intelligence, the community-based knowledge embedded in marginalized communities on both sides of the border. The project has transformed into a network of field stations that are located in marginalized communities on both sides of the border, but obviously also is a network of committed partnerships with nonprofit organizations that are rooted inside those communities already for decades. We have 3 stations, Earth Lab, and particularly the cross-border community stations that are situated in 2 marginalized neighborhoods flanking this contested border wall. In San Isidro and in this informal settlement in Tijuana. This has prompted us to curate, as if we were in a way cultural brokers, curate new specific programming within the university that can assure the transference of research to empower community activists, but also primarily to bring the social, economic, and political intelligence, knowledge of community activists into the university in a program that we call the Public Scholars Program, where we award every year a stipend to community leaders in each of these environments to come in a committed way to spend time with us in campus, to co-teach with us, even though they might not have the credentials to do so. And they become the ambassadors to engage our students with their urgent issues in order to reorganize curriculum, research, and education. Also receiving our students in the field to really circulate between activists, residents, and researchers. So in a sense, this knowledge exchange platform is a new form of collaborative education and research project. But what we've discovered that is incredibly relevant for us as architects and artists is that this has also become an incredible model for a shared urban development. In that sense, we discovered that the university and the community can both be co-developers of public space and housing, that the economic power of the university, its capacity for programming and for political representation can be equity, can be a leverage for the community to develop its own public spaces. Example of this is how Earth Lab, one of our stations, in collaboration with an environmental justice nonprofit organization, we received from the San Diego School District access to a 4-acre piece of land, a vacant parcel, to transform it in the next years into a 4-acre open-air environmental classroom around energy, water, and food justice issues. So it is our collaboration that enabled the school district to give us a lease for 40 years to really transform this environment. And here we are really enacting this idea of cultural brokering, where Robert Rash came to support our project together with the board of the nonprofit and community residents to begin the campaign to really make this a reality. And in the cross-border community stations with collaborations with Casa Familiar, a nonprofit in this neighborhood, the nonprofit acquired this historic church that we are transforming into the community station in this marginalized community with the help of Art Place America and the Park Foundation from New York that will create a pavilion for arts and culture to engage new urban pedagogy with the residents. But what is amazing is that this community station then becomes the seed for designing affordable housing around it. And finally, in Tijuana, our actual station becomes a multi-layer vertical public space equipped with social programming, science and health, and also arts and culture environments for scholars, researchers, and community activists basically to collaborate. So we are interested in the designing of both physical spaces, but also designing of the protocols, the systems of management, governance, and economic sustainability that would assure these spaces to truly be spaces of education that are sustainable in the long term. In other words, public space today more than ever needs tools to build community capacity for political action. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria and Natalia, for the invitation. It's been great to be here in Miami. Thanks, Giselle and Cherise, for the hospitality and attention. And the idea is to present Les Clíniques des Baluart, the clinics of Es Baluart. Es Baluart is a museum in Mallorca. So I can go ahead. I mean, just, yeah. So before I get deeper into the program, perhaps we can. Okay, cool. Thank you. Please let me give you some context about Mallorca. Mallorca is an island, it's a part of archipelago in the periphery of Spain in a way. It's almost 1 million inhabitants. And it has a specific cultural and identity context where the Catalan language is spoken. The economy is based in tourism and real estate, but before it was small industry and agriculture. You can think about tourism in figures like it's a small island that just from Germany receives 4 million people per year, which is a huge sum of people. So in Spain, 2011 was a key moment, a key year. That year we had the 15M movement, and that happened the 15th of May in Seoul, in Madrid, in a square, where spontaneously a massive crowd of people gathered and stay there, remain there for months, talking, discussing, meeting each other. That start a process of connections, of networks, not just in Madrid, but in the whole countries, and it was replicas outside internationally. Here it was the Occupy movement in New York and some other places. And in a way, that moment and that process changed our lives forever. But ironically, a few months later, a right-wing government came to power in Spain. That was November. And immediately, this right-wing government started to raise measures in terms of cultural policies, like severe cuts in public funding were done, like, for example, AECID, which is the agency of Spanish cooperation. Imagine in terms of cultural policies how sensitive it is and how important it is for a country, for a nation. So in some IT programs, the cuts affect, in terms of budget, it was almost 80% of cut in some of the programs. Grant programs were suspended, so many of them, not just cut, they were suspended totally. It was a general raise of taxes for cultural products, activities, and services, up to 21% from the previous tax rate. It was 10%. And any political initiative that aimed to change the carbon patronage law was frozen. We have fundraising or patronage law in Spain, which is, it has a 20% exception, taxes, fiscal exemption, but it's very, I think it's very restricted to very specific or very special cases. So in a way, this law, it is from 2003, I think, but it hasn't been functional, really. So that was the situation in 2011. So what the cultural world did in reaction to this kind of very aggressive measure. So the reaction was really very dull, mainly from the movie, theater, and music sectors. They were really active, and they gathered, they meet together, and they try to change things. At the same time, in Spain, we have huge, that was in parallel with the 15M movement, or that was a reaction probably, or flux that was connected with, social flux that was connected with that moment in 2011, but around 2013, it was these social movements called the Tides, Las Mareas. They were connected more with the educational system and the healthcare system, but they were huge in terms of impact, in terms of movement, in terms of interaction, and they were really successful in their demands from the socio-political perspective, because they were capable to engage the users. So it wasn't like a union demonstration, it was a really gregarious or selfish demonstration of people or professionals. There were whole communities getting out together and demonstrating and kind of fighting for better life, but also for rights which are really connected with our idea of public service, social democracy, etc. So within the cultural sector, the contemporary art community was the less reactive in a way, or proactive. That's something we can think about it. Why? It was an idea of create or promote a cultural tide, but it didn't happen. We gathered together, it was some work groups, We went to some of the bigger demonstrations, like galleries, artists, some curators, and the scholars, teachers for the university. But the figures, the people, imagine like 250,000, 350,000, 500,000 people on the street. We were like 200 people from the cultural sector there. So it was more obvious. I mean, it was has more impact from the cinema or theater because they are more well known. So it has a media impact, etc. But in terms of engaging people, in terms of influencing people, or having this kind of impact, it didn't work. So it was a total failure for the sector. So in a way, this is the political context where Nekania Aramburu was appointed director from Esbaluar Museum in 2013. And it was the very first time in this museum that she was appointed through a process, open and very transparent and democratic process, like an open call, open context, international contest. And perhaps here is kind of normal in some institutions, but in Spain, we don't have a really long tradition of this kind of procedures. Only since 2007, we have a code for good practices that was signed. It was signed between several professional organizations and the Ministry of Culture. And since then, but it's just an agreement. It's not a juridical document or something that obliges institutions. It's just a consensus, a very basic consensus to have kind of like good practices. And that was the context of her election. So the project, Nekane's project, was based in this idea of the museum out of the museum as an institution, and it included education, research, mediation, and social integration programs. And Les Clíniques, the clinic, is a part of this framework, and it responds to several elements. Number one, it was a previous need of the community for this. It is based in the idea of institutional co-responsibility, which is something that came up from these movements. I think perhaps we can discuss later on, Rachel, about this idea of co-responsibility, how the institution now is listening, how the institution is learning, how the institution now is much more open in relation with the communities they work with. And also, it is conceived as a public service, which is this idea of public service. It's a public institution, it's funded with public money. So in Europe, we have this idea about these kind of institutions should be financed with public money. And this public service, or this idea of public service, is more related with this social democrat idea of healthcare, rather than being connected with a business strategy or being art market oriented. I think you, Gordon, mentioned art as something like more connected with this idea of healthcare, which I did like a lot when you mentioned it yesterday. So Les Clíniques the clinic is an informal training education program for visual artists, very much based in organic methodology inspired by mediation practices. And the main objective that guide contents and methodologies implemented in the program is to foster the professionalization of the sector, enabling tools to analysis, knowledge, resources, and monitoring of creative practice and thought through the museum. Some elements of the program or ideas that go around the program is the legitimation of artistic teaching, curricular problems, formation of a coherent body of work, research and production in the face of institutionalization of art in increasingly competitive sector. And the program itself, we are in the 3rd edition. That's something I haven't said, is the 3rd edition we're doing. It lasts for 8 months. It has online and offline perspective. And we select between 15, 20 artists, which are selected from an international public call. Artists normally came from different backgrounds, positions, and nationalities. And the clinics, it is also has the aim to be a platform for the study and debate on training education models on different levels, implementing mechanisms halfway between academic teaching and current cultural production. So in the program, we focus a lot in ideas like collaboration, networking, co-production, mobility, community-based work, social engagement, etc. And always what we find out in these 3 years is it is a very organic program. We learn every year, we change things. We implement the methodology much more with intuition than being really sure, 100% sure what we're doing. But it's been working quite well. But we always have this kind of tension between artist expectations and the real outcome. Because when we work about community-based work, social engagement, I mean, we talk a lot with the artists, and the artists, they don't want to be mediators. I see myself, artists, as mediators, and I see them as social activists or teachers, but they don't want to be that. And that's a problem, because we design a methodology, we connect them with other possibilities of work, not just to produce the object of your work, but also to work in processes, to get engaged in work with other artists or platforms or ideas that could be work in the future. And this model, like working in between the lab, the academic, the organic, well, is kind of oriented to this, to see ways of producing, but working, but also having ways of living for them. That's a key thing on the program. So this, I said online, offline, we work with 3 specialists every year, different. We change them every year with different profiles. And we have 2 guest curators. Natalia will be guest curator this year. She will be traveling to Mallorca, hopefully in September. So that was, so that was my presentation. Thank you.
So I'm gonna go ahead and connect to Mo. And yes, it is. All right, here we go. Sure, this is on now. Hi. Yes. Yes.
Okay. So just tell me, how much time do I have, and then I can maybe start.
7 minutes. It's
Okay,
a
that's good.
7-minute presentation. Yeah.
No problem. So I can see the crowd, but I just wanted to say hello to everyone. I'm speaking with you from the beautiful Beirut in Lebanon. I was here to do some writing on my own, but also participate in an education program at Ashkal Alwan, which is Lebanon's, or one of Lebanon's main art organizations. I'm very proud to be here and working with people tonight. There was a very important lecture by Keller Esperin. And tomorrow Susan Schipper will be doing something, and I was involved with something the day before. So sorry for me not being able to be with you. That's why I can't explain where I am, because I would have loved to be there sitting next to you guys. So I'm just going to briefly explain to you a few little facts and anecdotes and stuff about New Center. The New Center for Research and Practice was created registered in July, but we started to work in September 2014 for several purposes. First of all, we were very much interested in putting in practice ideas of salvaging sort of existing, you can say, capitalist technologies and putting them towards a new use out of their original context. Mostly sort of consumer level, social media and other forms of network technologies that were offered by corporations at very low price or free, and sort of create a mesh out of different services, like what Google could offer and what Facebook could offer and what other companies could offer, and basically like WordPress could offer, and kind of build an institution out of these like ordinary consumer level network software. And this came out of a need to not only, because the ideas that we were interested in were already starting to pop up in different places. Our board member, Sohair Malik, was already teaching at CCS Bar. I think a couple of people on the board have been his students. And some of our instructors, I heard the name of Victoria Vanova, she just started teaching a seminar for us yesterday. We sort of like involved in the production and dissemination of some of these ideas, but we were interested in sort of like creating an institution that would, on a consistent and persistent manner, sort of provide support for these types of ideas that were just coming up in terms of new approaches to art making and thinking and critiquing art, particularly around sort of new rationalist and accelerationist ideas, but also a larger ecology of people who thought rigorously about the role of technology in present and future. And we were very much interested in supplying these type of theoretical and philosophical knowledge to artists and art professionals, and sort of like create a new link between theory and art practice, one outside of the already existing sort of like, quote unquote, the way contemporary art approach or colonized theory. So it was also about like being able to like use these technologies and these new philosophies and people who generated them to forge new links between theory and art practice. But on the practical side, we wanted to like provide connection to actual theorists and philosophers who weren't necessarily like visiting all sorts of local spots, and make connections between students and researchers who are in remote locations or were geographically marginalized, create links between them and be sort of like people who are more involved in sort of like metropolitan centers like New York, Berlin, Sydney, London, and also to provide an opportunity for these isolated students and researchers to connect with each other, because they might not have found like-minded friends and colleagues in their own local setting, but our network would provide them with a chance to meet people who were thinking along the same lines as them, but in faraway locations. And another practical reason we started the new center was to sort of like seek out and find these sort of like, I hate to use the word isolated, but really isolated individuals, and sort of like help to place them in rigorous graduate schools. Sort of like people who were too bright to have good GPAs, and they were stuck in some undergrad program somewhere. And so like we thought if we create the institution and attract them, we can help them to put together a proposal, letter of intent, and connect them to actual people who are inside the institutions, and provide them a chance to attend graduate school in better schools. And basically, yeah, so basically kind of almost like a placement agency on top of it. And also, like some of the other institutions that presented about their institutions tonight, we're not a degree granting institution, but we have no problem with working with people who are on the edges of degree granting institutions, mostly for creating these types of links between our researchers and students and professors who are inside these degree granting institutions. We've done several, basically every summer we do a major summer residency with one established or one or two established universities. Last year we worked with a new school at Pratt Institute in New York and held a week-long summer residency. The year before we did something with the Deakin University in Australia, Melbourne, and also with the Graz Technical University. And yeah, we've done these types of stuff with schools that kind of like legitimizes us a little bit more, but also provide a chance for our people to meet and work with people inside institutions. The other things I wanted to bring up, one of the major tasks that we sort of like had for ourselves was to sort of like help artists and art professionals to really understand the sort of like difference between theory, which is more sort of like a fashionable thing that comes and goes, and rigorous philosophy that has to do with like both Eastern and Western traditions of philosophy that goes back a couple of thousand years. And it is a form of relative of art that has been sort of like in our rush to embrace theories the old and classical link between philosophy with capital P and art was lost. And we were hoping to recreate a link between philosophy and art, and sort of like highlight to art and our professionals the significance of this link, and not be afraid of this capital P word called philosophy. And also part of that meant in practicality to basically teach artists to how to articulate themselves, both in words, in spoken words, and in language. Basically, teaching artists how to write through these seminars. And that's a big part of what we provide through our seminars. The people get a chance to work with these scholars actually on writing pieces. And in several occasions, we've included a text by our students and our researchers in different publications and in different seminars or symposiums that we've held. And also, if you think of it, most of our instructors, even though are famous writers, but they still suffer from lack of consistent income. So our institution provides them with a little bit of extra income, something equal and sometimes better than adjunct in terms of financial support. So that also is one of the reasons that we're there to provide this type of financial support for art instructors. And to just finish what I was saying, to practice what for a lot of our colleagues was a matter of generating ideas, we actually try to put them in practice by keeping this institution alive for the last 3 years. So I don't know if I spoke over 7 minutes or not, but I think this is good. And our student, just a little bit note about our student body. Our student body is mostly made up of grad students who are already in PhD programs, who think that by taking seminars from us, they'll enrich their process of writing, working on their practice-based art PhDs, or sometimes even humanities PhDs. So they're already in programs, and the funding for it often comes from their funding for their PhD. So they speak with their supervisors, and they talk about wanting to work particularly with one of our instructors, or they get a big chunk of grant and they register for a whole bunch of seminars. But basically, as it was brought up by the moderator, we're most, besides some philanthropic support we get, we're mostly supported through memberships and enrollment fees that our students pay to be in these seminars. So we're kind of a self-sufficient institution that way. So I think that's more than enough for now.
Thanks, Mo.
I'm glad Mo ended on talking about kind of where the students are at vis-a-vis the university, because that's the beginning of my first question. And this is kind of broadened for any of the panelists to begin to respond to. But I noticed, I picked up a thread of, this identification of certain sort of failures in traditional systems of education, of university education, for instance, or community service, and the impulse to work outside of them or even to circumvent them. My question is, how does your organization, or how do you think about, how do you then fit into the system once you've established your own model that maybe does one of these things? How then do you see yourself within the system after that, or like reapplying to it? So for anyone who wants to start.
I can start. It's interesting because I don't, and if I'm understanding your question correctly, you can correct me otherwise. I don't really see Art Center's programs necessarily outside of those things, right? Or really kind of maybe even crashing up so distinctly, but about creating maybe a new option. So in rethinking what we can do with institutions, right? Which we are just by the pure nature of the flexibility and malleability that the institution is in right now. I think we sort of present another option within this particular community alongside others. And maybe in reflecting upon this, 5 years from now, you say, okay, these things don't work, these things did work, and the institution needs to change toward these other things. But I think at the core of your question, in some ways, there is a general belief that the way that we imagine this institution can be reimagined based in a responsive manner towards those needs and where it stands within this community. But I think it stands as a viable other option.
Yeah. So in the case of, I guess your question is how we are, the program, how is connected with the context, or how that was the question? Yeah, more or less, or?
That's a very, thinking
Yeah,
about
from
what you're
the
providing alternatives.
from the scholar perspective, I mean, like the team, the whole educational team, we are learning. I mean, we know we're in a change of paradigm. So I think we go more liquid than formal, we go more experimental than articulated program. And we understand that everything has to be, I mean, the institution now is a position where listening and getting into consensus is very important. And this listening and this consensus making is oriented towards this kind of idea of how you can recognize the diversity in your community. And once this diversity is recognized or identified or mapped, then you can integrate different ideas or minorities. And you can also be allowed in this kind of situation to redistribute certain kind of resources. So we are working with this perspective because the situation, specifically Southern European countries, is dramatic for cultural production. Even thinking we have a public funded system and we have our traditions about certain kind of consensus, social consensus about supporting the arts and the culture. Even our constitution, has this kind of right. You have the right to access to culture and to be educated, etc. But in this kind of center, kind of this point, we fail. So that's how we focus the program in relation with the immediate context, which is the Balear Island, well, Mallorca Island, but also the mainland Spain. I don't know if I did answer your question, but
maybe we can add that obviously it's an incredible. Did I turn this off? An incredible range of obviously methodologies, interventions, ways of organizing ourselves, bottom up, top down, etc. In offering really very different vantage points about this relationship between institutions and communities in that sense. From our part, I think, and I'm speaking for both of us as partners in this project, I think the position we've taken is to really engage institutions. I mean, we would truly believe in an institutional dimension. In fact, we want to make institutions accountable, as Fona mentioned earlier, primarily at a time when public imagination continues to be eroded. Public infrastructure, public education. And I think the possibility of rethinking the institutions from within is something that is a task from all of us, I think. In fact, I think we believe that artists today can take a role of institution builders, and in that sense, the producers of new forms of economy, new forms of governance, and new forms of relation, let's say, to enable and increase those capacities of the bottom up. So the project that we are interested in is in a project of knowledge transference, let's say, from the bottom up to the top down, to push back upwards to transform institutions. And that, again, requires also a commitment to certain levels of longevity. I mean, I think that, once any of these projects that might be more activist and bottom up become institutions themselves, how do they sustain themselves? How do we produce a more committed, project in the context of these vulnerable, at least in our case, populations? So while, again, it is a challenge of knowledge transference, we see it also as a transference of forms of management. I think the moment that we might unplug from the communities that we engage, I think there should be enough institutional trace left so that the communities can, in fact, begin to develop their own forms of sustainability.
And if I can just add, so Teddy's speaking about institutional accountability at a macro scale, but for us this really comes down to the kind of education we're promoting within the institution. If we teach a studio, for example, where we are asking artists to become, and cultural producers to become critical of their own motivations, their own audience, the time in which they're writing, the materiality of their projects in relation to very concrete urgencies and crises and challenges in the world. And oftentimes we get pushback that production is is an idiosyncratic, kind of visceral kind of response to stimuli and in psychology and so forth. And there's a place for that, but we believe that art education within the institution, within the university, can avail itself of the critical tools that the university makes available, and that those critical tools can then be mobilized for impact outside the institution.
I think we have a sort of uneasy relationship with institutionality, which maybe I alluded to rather directly. And I think we've sort of always been on the fence. Like, how much of an institution do we want to become? Is that actually the best model for us, or do we want to, act like a cancer that could go inside of other institutions and maybe make them crumble, or help them find a healthy way to die? I forget. There's a really great Greek word for like how cells die. That's like not cancer, but is really nice. And I think, speaking to Mo's point about the relationship between art and philosophy, if philosophy is teaching us how to die, like art can possibly be that too, guiding us towards our own end in a way that might be one we can feel better about. So I think that's really like where we stand on the question of like how do we fit within the system. Is we really don't know. I think we spend a lot of time wondering about should we be sustainable or should we refuse to be sustainable? Because as soon as you start spending all of your time trying to just live, that's following the cancer model rather than following the model that says, can we get in and get out and actually do something beautiful while we're here? So I don't have an answer about that, but I'm leaning in one direction.
Yeah.
This metaphor of cancer a little bit further. We, on the other side, we're content focused. So we're not trying to like reinvent new forms of teaching that much within the classes or within the seminars. It's pretty much like a graduate seminar. What's important for us is the type of content that our instructors and professors provide is what is explosive about what we are, or what is different. And what we actually like to do is to penetrate and let these ideas take over existing humanities and institutions like cancer, but good cancer, not bad cancer. And so
Yeah, I think that's great, and I wanted to hit on that that idea that a lot of you spoke about of kind of empowerment of having students, like sort of bringing them in to teach almost right away, like most of the community you work with their student, or your students end up taking that role sort of as part of them being a student, or as part of the residency. I think that's really interesting and so dramatically different from, say, what we see in like museum education or a lot of a lot of more traditional art education, even outside of the university, where it's like public education is this thing where there's like, you know, there's an expert and like you're going to learn the most sort of basic knowledge so that you can have like a conversant, you know, reasonably like, you know, conversant ability with it. So I'm really curious about that in all of these presentations. But with that, I want these people want to sort of expand on that for one. But I also want to ask about your community or your sense of community. What is, so you're able to sort of offer this empowerment, but how are you finding people? Where are they coming from? Who's missing? Who would they be ideally? So those are two sort of disparate questions. And again, anyone can answer, and I may start interjecting though.
I can jump in right away because that's a tenet of ours in terms of our program, because it depends on this partnership with community agencies, and not any community agency. These are community agencies that have been rooted in these neighborhoods for decades. They have the capacity to summon the community, and so they have already a kind of system of outreach and workshop, let's say, dynamics that we have begun to co-produce together. I think that there is something that Javier mentioned earlier, which is essential, I think, to all of us, is that we are all questioning formal frameworks, let's say, of pedagogical systems. We're trying to produce a different platform where, in fact, co-production of knowledge drives new content in that sense. And sometimes it's a top-down, sort of more formal education that needs to be brought down in order to be filtered through the experiential learning and the performative dimension of everyday practices in communities. But the mediators become these agencies that we partner with. And the other aspect of this is that not only these nonprofit partners have the capacity to summon the community in fundamental ways, but they become the vehicles to enable other, I hate to call it forms of applied knowledge, because the kind of co-production and the co-curatorial dimension of the work in terms of new forms of education begins to enable the community to have evidence for transforming public policy. So they become the vehicles to carry that knowledge towards planning agencies, for example. A lot of our work with these neighbors is translating informal densities and economies in order to formulate new land use categories. And so I'm speaking again here of the effect that these educational processes produce in fact, intervening in the transformation of public policy.
Okay, maybe I'll jump in because I was the last person. Well, it's interesting because for us, the need for what we were doing was so there that we actually, when we started, we didn't even have to go after anyone. All we had to do was, in our first semester, was we announced our program, and then people from nowhere just started to come toward us, and especially if you consider how we have students from all over the world, it was kind of startling how people found out about us. But we also had a sort of like a system of using the social media to approach people. Our seminars are all advertised on Facebook, and we really use Facebook as a way of sort of like gauging what's going on out there in terms of audience. And then also we use a couple of main advertising agencies that run as for education institutions like ePlus and Art Forum, Art and Education. They usually run our ads, and we announce our programs there. So that's a really big help because usually we totally get a lot of students out of those announcements. But really, it's mostly done online, and most of the students will never actually meet them in person, and our relationship with them is basically very short. So that's how we sort of like, and also another thing, our instructors have follower meetings. So they usually announce the seminars on their blogs or their mailing list, and we usually get their fans to come to us just out of the generosity of them announcing these seminars. So they always bring new people to us by just the virtue of announcing what they're doing for us on their own sort of like social media outlets. So it's got pretty much social media based.
For us, it's a combination of strategies, and I think of that also incorporate the history of the institution itself. I mean, Art Center has been around since 1984, for 30-something years. So in part, we draw from our alumni base, from this history of kind of relationships with artists already. But in the now, we also kind of reach out a lot to basically cultural practitioners in Miami through a variety of different means, social media, you name it, like word of mouth. We kind of try. We also make collaborations with local universities, right? So Florida International University, actually, their student body base takes our workshops as well. And it's actually a really interesting relationship that we've developed with them because they have this view of the university as being this kind of formal place that can actually relate or can work with what they consider more maverick sort of ways of dealing with in informal education, right? And then, yeah, we use all of that, all of that e-plex, calls, partnerships, friends, et cetera, to try to kind of get people together. So, yeah.
Yeah, for Esbaluart, it's it's a new situation because, I mean, Esbaluart is a museum, and before Necane's appointment in 2013, it was the typical, I would say, static museum with exhibitions, permanent collection, guest curated exhibitions, etc. But it wasn't perceived as a place to gather or to say more things about just visiting the exhibition, so eventually some workshops, etc. So now, after these years of Necane's work, not just with the clinics, Les Clínicas, but with other programs, the museum is functioning within the context, the Balearic Islands, as a social interface in a way. They're dealing with communities and they're dealing with groups that are researching about new forms of tourism. They are dealing with researching about new ways of seeing healthcare system to be more, I would say, public, supporting a more diverse and has a deeper impact in the context. The museum is working with this artist residency, with networks with universities, but also with small communities in the barrios. The museum is also connected with this idea of recovering the historical memoir, which was erased. I mean, during the Civil War in Spain, the Balearic Islands, Mallorca, was a place where the Italians had a big, huge base for their airplanes. And it was no war at all because it was conquered in one day. So it was a total erase of narratives and imaginary of the people. So the museum, in that kind of case, is working as a social interface. And this idea, so the clinics, the program wants to connect all of these framework ideas and work with these communities, with the artists and the practitioners or researchers, educators that participate in the program, opening more possibilities of work. And it's also connected with the crisis, with the recession we're living. And this is what we're doing. But we are having this tension I mentioned before, it's a huge gap because formal education is based in programs 50, 60, some of them are almost 100 years old. So it's a huge gap between formal education, academic education in the university in Spain, and these very experimental, radical programs like the clinics in the museum. And it's also these two dynamics that the program wants to articulate within the museum context. Is like making possible that people meet each other within the island because they're not very communicated, within the different islands, 4 islands in the archipelago, but also with the mainland, with Spain. So this is how it's working.
Yeah, just very quickly, I mean, a challenge for us is obviously working across a militarized border, and many of the communities and cultural producers that we want to engage are living on the other side of this international wall, which is becoming increasingly difficult to traverse, and many of our partners now are having difficulties crossing. And so one thing that we've been, I mean, every city has its borders, and transgressing those borders is a challenge. In our region, we're trying to think of transgressive technologies and ways that we can communicate and work with our partners across the border without having to physically move. So it's creating new challenges in communication.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to open it up after Seth talks, just so get ready with your questions.
Get ready. Yeah, so it was two questions, right? The question about the role of teaching and then the role of community. Is it more or less something like that?
Yeah, well, about sort of having your students teach sort of really quickly and training, training your students, that being sort of an inherent part of most of your program.
I mean, I think specifically for us, because we are exclusively a art-focused education model, is our thing, and at least I kind of come from the radical position that art can't be taught. I don't really think we treat each other as teachers or the people that are teaching. I mean, that's sort of a nominal role, but it's more like, all right, you put together the list of books and you show up a little bit before everybody else. But you're really just there to kind of help moderate a conversation, and everyone who's in the room has as much to give as anyone else. And if you don't want to be there and don't want to be involved, well, just don't come, because, or come and just be quiet. I think it's fine too. So I think it's much easier for us to think about like putting someone in that position very early on and not being that worried about credentials, because I think if anyone's eager enough, they'll be fine, and the group will kind of work itself out. Just to say something a little more broadly about like what is the community that we actually deal with, I think echoing a point I've heard before, is the biggest thing we do to kind of expand the reach of like who comes to what we do is by who we have leading those things. So by not having a system where we have the same group of people leading courses every semester, or and being able to rotate people through and bring in new faces and new ideas, it perpetually kind of creates new communities that aren't necessarily expecting each other. So people who would come because so-and-so is doing something they're interested in, they come for that, and then they're more likely to come to something that they wouldn't have come to the next go-around. And so you start to put people together who like didn't know that they were going to meet and fall in love and have something interesting to argue about.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, we can start to take questions. Who's first? Okay.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. This was very, very interesting. I had a question about temporality, which I think it was kind of touch upon up on the surface a little bit, and I think it also applies for certain people, not for everyone. But do you guys see some of your projects as like five-year plan projects, 10-year? Is it forever? Like, is there? So that was my first question, and then I had a comment, which was about like this, to me, vague idea of like the failure of the institution. Like in Tallahassee, there's this nonprofit called the Institute for Governance, which they actually get a lot of funding, and they did a lot of research on the Clintons, and they published this book, like the Clinton, I mean, I haven't read this book, but that book then was taken to the New York Times and was published on the first page of the New York Times, and then there was this history. So there are institutions, actually a nonprofit, that is actually working quite well. So I just wanted to kind of say that as a provocative comment. Mm-hmm. But I'm more interested in the first question.
On the issue of time, I think it's something that we think about quite a bit, and the idea that these projects have different iterations, right? So I don't know that necessarily I can give you like this exact time scale of like, oh, it's a 3-year or 5-year. I'm certain it's not forever, right? Because Miami's anyway on its on its lack of forever time scale. But I do think that if we were to think about it in results kind of thing, I don't see the kinds of programs that we do as having these immediate kind of turnarounds. I think they do have immediate moments, and they have like very immediate results, like right after our fellows do go and teach, right? And the idea is that they incorporate themselves in our program. But I think there is a hope for a kind of longevity and sustainability in what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, Yeah, in the case of Svalbard, the program, the clinics, respond to a really very specific socio-political context. And I would be very happy if this kind of socio-political context change, and then the program need to evolution or be really modulate in a different way, but it responds to this, and also it responds and is connected with this idea of the director of Nekane Aramburu to connect the museum with all of these different players and actors within the context. Mm-hmm. And there is another idea about empowering the artist, and also this word that we use. I know it has a different meaning perhaps here, like entrepreneurship, or being proactive, or being committed, or being engaged, or being open to different practices. And this is something which is connected with the educational system, which is very traditional and very old and very rigid. So yeah, a socio-political context, very specific, dramatic. A person as director in an institution, so institutions, they don't change by themselves. They change because of people, or because of external pressure, or because this kind of socio-political context. And also with this idea of empowering the artists since this kind of mediation program.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a strand on this idea of responding to political and social urgency. So, I mean, our projects are obviously very long-term. We've developed very long relationships of trust with particular nonprofits that we work with over time. But, I mean, I think in our case, we try to be very agile to respond to urgencies as they emerge. One of the things that we've been really committed to is intervening. So we're urbanists, and we work at the scale of the city. And, you know, we've learned from several examples. I mean, we're students of Antanas Mockus in Bogota. And Antanas understood that in order to change things in a city, to make cities better, it's not just simply about intervening physically, or, you know, it's about changing hearts and minds of citizens and perceptions about things that are happening in the world. And to do that, like right now, I mean, we're living in a time in a context of extreme fear in our part of the world. And so it's about retooling and turning very quickly. So temporality for us means being able to shift on a dime and begin to focus on things that people are thinking about and people are worried about. And so I think we're constantly responding kind of to the context around us, and while we keep those long-term projects going, we're kind of we're working in very kind of immediate ways as well.
It is true, and so obviously it's a constant negotiation, all right, of the immediate and the proximity of these issues, and how we have to be agile enough to transform and move, you know, organically through the process, depending on that specificity, that social specific context. But at the same time, we want to be maybe stubborn in suggesting that this is about a long-term commitment. And that's really the kind of social agreement with our partners right now in these communities, mainly communities that have been disappointed throughout history as institutions from the top down come in and out. And that's the reason, and I mean, we were rushing through our presentation, but that's the reason we are linking our education program, our collaborative educational research platform, with new forms of development. Because the housing that we are developing with our partners is really a source of revenue. For us to not depend on foundations eventually. I mean, obviously, right now, the lifespan of our program right now is 5 years. That's the funding that we receive from a Camera of Foundations and the commitment from our chancellor, et cetera. So the commitment here develops as we also begin to own our own modes of productivity and our own forms of economy, so that that revenue can trickle back into our program. But then also there is the trace. I think that all of us are interested in a parasitic dimension, I think, in a more nomadic, distributed framework of education. And so we are also thinking of ourselves inside the universities, thinking of the cancer metaphor, of carving new curricular spaces that were never considered. So finally, our chancellor is open to produce a new curriculum, a new minor on poverty that really brings some of these programs to really be to to exist within the university curriculum as a community-engaged research and education curriculum. So this is about a long term. And finally, the other issue of temporality here is that the workshops that we co-produce with our partners that involve students, researchers, and community residents are really about new forms of community engagement. And that's what we learned particularly from Antanas Mokus, that ultimately education can be the tool today in art, particularly in culture, as engines for a new form of community engagement. And so I think that to redefine the community workshop right now also speaks of long-term commitments for the community to develop further.
I think when we first started, we wanted to commit to the idea of the school sounding like it was somewhat like an institution that was going to live on for as long as was possible, primarily because we didn't want anyone to confuse it with our art practice, coming out of a collective and with a sort of distinctive stuff. We made some stuff. We wanted students not to feel like that was what they were coming to get educated in. We didn't want a bunch of people coming expecting to put on cat makeup. That wasn't the point, though some of them do. So we set out with an idea that it would actually could last in perpetuity, and we would build it in some ways like it maybe a typical nonprofit might structure itself, primarily to avoid having a conversation about relational aesthetics or anyone to say, so is it an art project? Which I just tell people, I don't know. I don't care about that conversation. It's not interesting. But now, now that it's been a while, like 9 years, I'm not so worried about it anymore. And I think the question of temporality becomes interesting again. And I like the idea of being able to say, well, we might do something completely different tomorrow. And in large part, what we've seen over the life cycle that's existed in so far is that every year is different, primarily because the people that are trying to figure this out, me and a few others, are just very restless and feel like we've learned something like every semester or so that we want to try something else, or we think we can improve it in some way, and we want to, we're really just restless, crazy people, I think is most of it. We should probably do something else and be more consistent. But.
Okay, we can take a couple more questions.
I was going to say, Mo, I think, has a response. Can you hear us, Mo? Can you speak? Oh, no, he doesn't.
Oh, he's
Come in. Oh, unmute him. Hello? Okay, in the meantime, maybe we can... How about,
Hello?
yeah, there you go.
Yes. Yeah, we might have to do this a few times. This is just like part of like it's still in like 19th century Iranian technology, and I can't believe that like we managed to actually run an educational institute on these type of like archaic technologies. But for us, I mean, practically speaking, our certificate programs are a year long, and it consists of students taking 12 seminars. 11 of them are sort of like basically 11 one-credit seminars, or a combination of 1 or 2 credit seminars, culminating into 11 credits. Each seminar is like very classic. Each seminar consists of 4 2.5-hour sessions, so basically 10 hours of learning. So within 11 of those, plus 1 directed study seminar, we conclude the certificate program. So, but of course that's just like a basic, sort of like the temporality of the official version of what we do. But in reality, it all depends on the people who come in, because we expose these younger students to new sets of ideas and philosophies. And some of them are very quick to catch on, and within 2 or 3 months, they're totally like jiving, and they're totally like connecting to all sorts of community members around the world, and really starting to think collectively with our instructors. And some of them are a little bit slower, some of them are just basically there to just plug in a chapter into their PhD, what do you call it? Dissertation. That's all they're there to do. They don't want to do much more. So it all depends. But But together, it's been so far 3 years, and I think we still have 2 or 3 more years to go to really sort of like get a good sense of what it takes to get somebody from A to Z. But we're committed, and we're not like some of you guys been around for a long time, certainly not 9 years. But yeah, but we're so far been 3 and some years, 3 years and some months, and we're kind of proud of what we've done so far with so little resources we have. So.
Okay. Do you have a question? Yeah. Okay, great.
So you have 5 really brilliant examples of alternative pedagogical structures, and these are all in response to existing forms that, come down hundreds of years from guilds and so forth. What I'm seeing is, and I just come myself a few days ago from a meeting of presidents of small colleges, and everybody agrees. I mean, these institutions are highly stressed. The model is not working. They're embedded in all forms of hierarchical systems that have no honest relationship with an equitable, fair exchange of either power or power of knowledge or access to knowledge. And in the end, you end up with these highly gilded certificates that are supposed to allow you to enter into some sort of meaningful commercial engagement. This is obviously not what education is. This is not the core of teaching and learning. And what you guys have put together are some really splendid examples of alternative approaches to this. And I'm just curious, what is the meta sort of thinking? Are there groups of you? Are there places where we can go and think about trying to empower these various models, these alternatives to structures that have been around, such that they can actually have a bottom-up support to become viable alternatives or viable new frontiers for the super essential generational transmission of knowledge and sort of collective circulation of ideas. So what's the meta organization, or how and where do these conversations take place, and how can we collectively make these models provide a alternative?
Let me just take this as the first question. Now, if there is no meta-organization, actually that would be a great idea if there was some kind of a loose umbrella, and hopefully conferences like this can provide the seed ideas for such things, right? But even if we don't have those institutions, and even if people don't want to directly inject funds into our institutions, all of these institutions enjoy receiving money from people who can afford to give us funds. But even if you don't want to do that, what's important is to putting pressure on existing educational institutions to recognize us, to work with us, to team up with us, to accept the kind of knowledges and scholarships that come out of us as legit, and accept our students and exchanges, and through that itself can give us a lot of can connect us basically together in a way also. If they accept us and work with us and legitimize us further, I think that's a great help. So put pressure on universities in your communities to reach out for us and work with us, even if it's not long term but short term.
I think it's, yeah, sorry.
They might learn something.
Yeah. From the university.
The incentive is that public education is disappearing, at least in our context. The incentive is that more and more the political structures are hijacked by ignorance. The incentive is, how do we rethink the role of institutions in taking a more political role in really representing the issues at stake? I mean, to really calling the problem for what it is. So I think this level of institutional accountability is fundamental here. In other words, again, as Santana's Mocos and some of the incredible cases in Latin America of urban transformation that have used urban pedagogy and education as a tool to intervene in transforming social norms and behaviors, hearts and minds, as Mona said earlier, is to intervene in the altering and transformation of public opinion, so that we can begin to really change hearts and minds in rally a new type of political commitment that defends the right of the collective and the well-being of the, of the public. I think that to me is fundamentally a shared responsibility, that if that is not the greatest incentive of all today, particularly in the context where we find ourselves, I think something is missing.
And just one more thing, we were able to identify a critical mass within the university of faculty and students and graduate students who actually agreed that we needed to be thinking more expansively about what it means to get an education in a public university. So your comment was fantastic, and we actually, over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, have identified 10, 15 faculty members on the campus who actually agree with us in different fields. In many of these projects, now we're working together, and we're sort of a united voice within the university coming to the administration that this is something we believe in, something we want to do. I have to say the incentive for the university gets stronger when we also make that case to funders who are willing to actually infuse these projects with resources.
Sorry, I meant to say in terms of this meta issue, obviously I would say is to intervene in public opinion through new forms of urban pedagogy, but I think it is also, it really requires then a kind of recalibration of our own desires and aspirations. In other words, I think we are preaching to the choir way too much. And I think to learn new languages, new tools to speak, I hate to say, to the enemy or to those who really declare opposition, I think more than ever is really a pedagogical project. And I think that more and more this is something that has opened up to us as a challenge. How do we engage the other? And education obviously becomes an incredible tool.
In the case of Esvaluar, the clinics, the program is covering a void within the island, within the archipelago. But connected, what you were saying, Teddy, we have like 3 different examples in Spain, and they go to the basic. They go to primary and secondary school. So there are 3 programs right now. They are very microscopic. They are very small. I think the 3 of them, they act or they function as bacteria, and that means like putting artists or cultural producers in secondary and primary schools. One is called Levadura from Fundación Santander. The other one is Transforma from Museum Reina Sofía. And the other one is Aquí Trabaja un Artista, Here Works an Artist from Centro de Arte 2 de Mayo. They've been done for 2-3 years at the moment. And I think these are 3 examples which explain the situation in the country, and they're really small initiatives, but the idea is once these initiatives are prototyped after 3, 4, 5 years, they can be immediately replicated in hundreds of schools. So that's the revolutionary thing, and it can do it with PDF downloading, online courses, workshops. We have the technology. But all of these programs are done by private public institutions, a small budget, small teams, but a lot of courage and commitment. And that's the way. And they decide not to go into the university, not to go into adult education. They say, okay, let's go to primary school, secondary school. Let us start from there. I can give you the links to these kind of programs, but they're very interesting.
I think on that note.
So that was a really great question on which to wrap it up, and indeed we have to wrap it up anyway. I want to add one further thing, which is to say that I think barring, or as we try to get these larger institutional forums to work with us or to be parasitical towards them. Meanwhile, there are all these sort of iterative knowledge sharing moments like this one today, and like the fact that we have Teddy and Fauna here because they're doing workshops with Art Center and sort of finding different ways to have them sort of spread the word about what they're doing and then hear about all these other things. And I think it happens in those sort of smaller network ways too, which I think is pretty awesome. So with that, I want to thank everybody and thank the audience too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mo. Good night, Mo.